journey took place in 1908. It was the years immediately following Federation, when the fledgling nation was starting to look towards the inner part of the country to find an identity. 1908 was the same year that Dorothea McKellar wrote her famous poem, My Country, and the same year in which We of the Never Never was published. Australians were exploring what it meant to be Australian, laying claim to the centre of the country, which had seemed so hostile. The arrival of the automobile on the scene provided another tool in the settler's toolbox for taming the hostile land. It was also the year following the Paris to Peking race, so epic journeys were somewhat in vogue. This was still the very early days of motoring, don't forget. Most states still did not have a system for registering motor vehicles, and less than a decade before this, it had been illegal to drive a car without somebody walking ahead with a red flag to warn others of on the road of the approach of a self-propelled vehicle. So we're talking very early motoring days here, and here's two blokes who say, hey, let's take it to Darwin. Such a journey did require the right people. What Dutton and Orange did cannot be described as exploration. They were travelling over land that people had conquered on horseback, on foot, and even on bicycles. What they did with the motor car, however, was to claim the land once more with new technology. The new technology required a unique combination of people to make it successful. At the time, cars were still considered by many as toys for the rich. And Harry Dutton was certainly from a rich family. He was heir to Anlaby Station near Kapunda in South Australia. It's good, my photos still match my talk. His family's wealth came first from their large pastoral properties and then from the discovery of copper on their land. Anlaby was indeed a grand house. It had acres of formal gardens supporting 14 gardeners. It had a deer park, peacocks in the gardens, and employed enough people to field both a cricket and a football team, although I don't know if that was at the same time. I suspect not. A journey such as the transcontinental crossing required significant financial backing. The Duttons of Anlaby were able to provide not only one, but 2 Talbots to complete this journey. And don't worry, this didn't mean that there were no cars left at Anlaby Station while Harry had 2 Talbots in Central Australia. They, I think, had another 3 cars, but I'm not sure if that was all at the identical time. A new technology such as a car was a complicated beast, untried in such conditions. Managing it, knowing how to coax it, understanding its limitations and its strengths was no simple job. Murray Ornger was undoubtedly one of the best in the business. He had an intuitive understanding of motor mechanics and engineering. From the beginning of his working life, he'd shown tremendous aptitude, and this no doubt secured him the role of accompanying Harry Dutton on the journey. Dutton and Ornger came from very different family backgrounds, but they both brought something to the table that the others simply could not provide. So perhaps there was a sense of fate in their coming together to undertake this courageous journey. But given, as we already know, that they didn't break new ground where they were going, does this journey really have any historical value? Certainly it's a ripping yarn with some great pictures to accompany it, but as a piece of history, does it really matter? Well, I would argue that it does matter because of the legacy that it left. Dutton and Ornger proved that motor vehicles were a viable means of transport in remote regions of the continent. Their first journey was to herald great change for everybody who lived there. For the settlers who had made this their home, the cattle stations and telegraph stations, it announced that their isolation was to start to fade. A good day's horse riding could cover about 25 miles. In good conditions, a car could do this in an hour. We know that there wasn't much of those good conditions in the centre at the time, but Dutton and Ornger proved that it was possible for a vehicle to negotiate there. For the Aboriginal people of the centre, things were to change more dramatically and more rapidly. There are stories of Indigenous people clambering up trees and hiding in bushes as the mysterious smoking buggy approached. And while they might have been afraid, in the years that followed, motorised transport facilitated the more rapid takeover of their lands, and today the blight of massive road toll and petrol sniffing have left enormous scars on Indigenous communities. Yet on the other hand, Aboriginal people have embraced the car into their culture. It is now an important tool in remote communities for keeping culture alive and strong, as it is used to help people fulfil their cultural and family obligations. And 100 years on, mechanical skills of Aboriginal people are legendary and have been profiled on popular television programs like Bush Mechanics. So essentially, it could be argued that this journey serves as one of the markers of change in outback Australia. It was the first sign of a great revolution to come. And so the car itself and the story it tells becomes a very important object to be preserved. And we take that responsibility very seriously at the National Motor Museum. The National Motor Museum in Birdwood has approximately 400 vehicles on display, including cars, motorbikes and commercials. It's also home to one of the nation's finest motoring research libraries. We have on display Tom Cruise's Leyland Badger, the Shearer steam carriage, a 34 Ford Coupe utility, a very rare example, first utility produced in Australia, and the second to last Mitsubishi 380 off the production line in Adelaide before the company ceased manufacture. However, the Talbot is arguably the most significant vehicle in our care. The Talbot is still maintained in running order, although it is rarely driven anywhere other than the museum's own driving track. Some people have expressed regret that the museum chose to transport the Talbot on this purpose-built trailer for its 100th anniversary, rather than to drive it. This decision wasn't taken lightly, but it was never really in doubt. As a museum, our responsibility is to ensure that the Talbot is preserved for future generations, and hopefully in another 100 years there'll be another team of people determining the most appropriate way to celebrate the bicentenary. Working with professional conservation staff, we've developed a plan for the long-term care of the car. The travelling format also allowed us to present this wonderful story to the people of Central Australia. Our trailer sides opened out to reveal not only the car, but text panels and touchscreen computers that told the story. It allowed us to be open in all weather, providing protection for the vehicle, if not for the staff. And this photo of our curator Matthew always makes me laugh. Which may make me an unpleasant person, but I was taking the photos. We stopped in places where no other national touring exhibitions had ever visited. This photograph was taken in Maree. And in fact, Maree holds the distinction of being the only place where the weather actually prevented us opening up one day. And there was a massive dust storm. But we did the only sensible thing. We did marketing that day. I went and sat in the pub and chatted to every person in Maree. And the following day, in fact, 160 people, a record for while we were out and about, came and visited us. So we were toying with the idea of every second day sitting in pubs. But that didn't seem to quite match the grant deed that we received from the Commonwealth Government. But we'll know for next time.